Hey everyone, ready for another deep dive? Today we're going to be exploring something that most of us don't think about nearly enough, and that's the sneaky signs of nutrient deficiencies. You might even find yourself relating to a few of these.
Yeah, it's kind of alarming, actually, how often a seemingly minor symptom can actually point to something missing in our diets.
Exactly, and that's why we're diving into this YouTube video by Dr. Eric Berg, DC, called 21 Signs Your Body Needs Specific Nutrients.
Dr. Berg is a chiropractor, but he really emphasizes nutrition in his practice. So he breaks things down in a way that's pretty easy to understand.
And get this, he claims most people are deficient in key nutrients.
Which is, I mean, if you think about it, kind of makes sense. Our modern diets, they're not always the most nutrient dense.
Okay, but before we get too worried, remember, this is just a starting point for your own research or maybe a conversation with your doctor. We're not diagnosing anything here.
Exactly. This deep dive is all about empowering you with knowledge.
So Dr. Berg starts off by talking about tingling in the toes. He says it's a major red flag for B1 deficiency. Why toes specifically, though? What's the connection there?
Well, B1, also known as thiamine, is crucial for nerve function. And those nerves that run all the way down to your toes, well, they're the longest ones in your body, right? So they're kind of the most vulnerable to damage when you're lacking B1. That tingling you feel, that's actually a type of nerve damage called peripheral neuropathy.
Neuropathy. Now that you mention it, I've heard that's also a common complication of diabetes. Is there a connection there?
Yeah, absolutely. High blood sugar levels, like you see in diabetes, can actually deplete B1, leading to that same nerve damage. It's a good example of how interconnected different aspects of our health really are.
That's a good point. So how can we make sure we're getting enough B1? I'm assuming leafy greens are a good source.
Leafy greens are fantastic for a lot of nutrients, but for B1, some of the best sources might actually surprise you.
Oh, really? Like what?
Think pork,
Hmm.
especially lean cuts. Liver is also a great source, and other meats too.
Pork. Huh. I wouldn't have guessed that.
Yeah, it's actually surprisingly high in thiamine. And liver, well, that's a nutritional powerhouse, although I know it's not for everyone. You can also get B1 from sunflower seeds and eggs. Those are good options too.
Okay, so there are options. What about Dr. Berg mentioned something called benfotiamine? I don't think I'm familiar with that one.
Yeah, benfotiamine is a fat-soluble form of B1, and it's actually absorbed better by the body, especially for people who might have absorption issues. It's something to consider talking to your doctor about if you think you might be deficient in B1.
Interesting. Okay, well, let's move on to other B vitamins because Dr. Berg linked a whole bunch of them to various symptoms. He mentioned cracks at the corners of your mouth. He said that could be a sign of B2 deficiency. And then thinning hair or brittle nails, he said that could point to not enough biotin, which is B7.
Right, exactly. So B2, also called riboflavin, is really important for healthy skin and mucous membranes. So that explains the cracks at the corners of the mouth. And biotin, that's all about building keratin. Keratin is a protein that's really important for strong hair, skin, and nails. So if you're noticing those issues, maybe check your biotin intake.
Huh. Makes you wonder if all those biotin supplements people are taking are really living up to the hype.
Right.
What about premature graying? Dr. Berg linked that to low folate, which is B9.
That's right. Folate's essential for cell growth and division, and it also helps with the production of melanin. Melanin is the pigment that gives our hair its color. And here's an interesting, folate also plays a role in DNA repair.
Oh, wow. So it's important for more than just our hair color.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Last one in the B vitamin category. Dr. Berg said that mouth ulcers could be a sign of B12 deficiency. Why is that?
Well, B12 is really important for keeping our mucous membranes healthy, including the lining of our mouth. So when you're deficient, those tissues can break down, and that can lead to those painful ulcers. And, it's not just mouth ulcers, prolonged B12 deficiency, that can lead to some serious complications like anemia, nerve damage, and even permanent neurological problems.
Oh, wow. That's scary. Definitely not something to ignore. So where do we get B12 from?
So good sources of B12 include animal products. So like red meat, liver, and clams are good sources. If you follow a plant-based diet, then you'll want to be, extra mindful of getting enough B12 through fortified foods or supplements because it's not naturally found in that many plant-based sources.
I've noticed that liver, red meat, and eggs keep coming up as good sources for a lot of these B vitamins.
Yeah, they do. And that's because they're naturally rich in so many essential nutrients. But, a balanced diet should obviously include plenty of other foods too, like fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and all that good stuff.
Okay, so let's move beyond the B vitamins and explore some other deficiencies and their surprising signs. Dr. Bird actually linked deep pelvic bone pain to vitamin D deficiency, which seems like a bit of a leap.
Yeah, it might seem that way at first, but vitamin D is actually super important for bone health. It helps our bodies absorb calcium, and calcium is what builds and maintains strong bones. And here's the concerning part. Dr. Berg claims that up to 80% of people could be deficient in vitamin D.
80%, that's a huge number, so he must be a big proponent of vitamin D supplements then.
He does recommend supplementing, especially since a lot of us, we don't get enough sunlight exposure. Sunlight's really the most natural way to boost our vitamin D levels, right?
Yeah.
But he actually suggests a daily dose of 10,000 IU for maintenance. But as always, it's always best to talk to your doctor before starting any new supplements.
Right, of course. Okay, so let's switch gears to some female-specific issues now. Dr. Berg discussed heavy menstrual bleeding and intense cramping. He linked the heavy bleeding to vitamin K1 deficiency and the cramping to a lack of magnesium.
It's so interesting how those two seemingly unrelated things can be traced back to specific nutrients.
Right.
So vitamin K1, that's really important for blood clotting. So if you don't have enough, it makes sense that you might bleed more heavily. Magnesium, on the other hand, helps to regulate muscle contractions. So that explains why it's so important for easing cramps.
Didn't he also mention high estrogen as a potential factor in heavy bleeding?
He did. He did mention that, but he really focused more on the nutritional angle. Of course, hormonal imbalances can play a role in menstrual issues, but making sure you're getting enough of those key nutrients, well, that can definitely support overall hormonal health.
Okay, and then speaking of hormonal health, he also talked about fibroids, those benign growths in the uterus, and he claimed that vitamin D could actually help shrink them, along with magnesium, zinc, and vitamin K2. Is there any truth to that?
Yeah, it's an interesting point. More research is definitely needed in this area, but it does kind of highlight how these nutrients can really impact various bodily functions, maybe even helping with things like fibroids.
He suggested a pretty high dose of vitamin D for fibroids, though, like 20,000 to 30,000 IU daily. That seems like a lot. Yeah. And definitely something to discuss with your doctor before you just go and try it yourself.
Oh, absolutely.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's crucial to talk to a healthcare professional for personalized advice, especially when you're talking about high doses of any kind of supplement.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground already, but we still have a whole bunch of signs and deficiencies to go through.
Right.
Are you ready for more?
Oh, I'm ready. Bring it on.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. I am still trying to wrap my head around all those crazy connections between everyday symptoms and nutrient deficiencies. Like, I never would have thought about that.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in, isn't it? But I think that's what's so fascinating about this deep dive. It really makes you think twice about those little niggles that we often just brush off.
Totally. Like, I never would have guessed that a chronic cough could be linked to low calcium. It's amazing. Makes you wonder how many other signals we're just missing, because we don't know.
Exactly. It just shows how important it is to really tune into our bodies and pay attention to those whispers, even the ones that seem insignificant. Who knows what they could be telling us, right?
So true. Okay, so I'm ready to dive back into Dr. Berg's recommendations. In the last part, we covered a lot of the symptoms, but we didn't really get into the specifics of what to actually eat for each of those potential deficiencies.
Yeah, let's go over those. Food is our first line of defense when it comes to preventing and addressing these nutrient deficiencies. It's the foundation.
Perfect. So let's start with those B vitamins. We talked about tingling in the toes being a potential sign of a B1 deficiency. Can you remind me what the top sources for thiamine are again?
Oh yeah, for B1, remember those surprising sources we talked about? Think pork, especially the lean cuts. Liver's another good one, and then other meats too.
Okay, right, the pork, yeah.
Yeah.
That was surprising.
Yeah, don't forget about sunflower seeds and eggs as well. Those are good options.
Got it. Okay, what about B2, which was the one linked to cracks at the corners of the mouth?
Right, so liver, red meat, and eggs are all good sources of B2. Oh, and B2 is also called riboflavin. So, if you see that on a label.
Oh, good point, yeah.
You can also find it in dairy products, almonds, and mushrooms.
Okay, so for biotin, which Dr. Berg said is important for healthy hair, skin, and nails, where do we get that?
Eggs are a great source of biotin, and so are nuts and seeds, and also organ meats and dairy products. It's in a lot of those nutrient-dense foods.
Interesting. Okay, what about folate, the one he linked to premature graying?
Leafy greens are really your best bet for folate. So think spinach, kale, collard greens, You could also find it in legumes, asparagus, citrus fruits.
Lots of good sources there. Okay, and then B12, the one that was linked to like everything. Mouth ulcers, hearing loss, so many things.
Right. For B12, definitely focus on those animal products like red meat, liver, clams. And, remember, if you're following a plant-based diet, you'll need to be extra mindful about getting B12 through those fortified foods or supplements.
Yeah, because it's not really naturally found in a lot of plant-based foods, right?
Right, exactly.
Okay, it seems like liver keeps coming up as a real nutritional powerhouse.
It really is. It's packed with so many vitamins and minerals. It's not everyone's favorite food, I know.
Not my favorite, but good to know. It's, good for you. Okay, so moving on from the B vitamins, we talked about vitamin D being crucial for bone health and maybe even helping to shrink fibroids. What are the best ways to boost our vitamin D levels?
Well, sunlight exposure, that's really the most natural way to get vitamin D. But, a lot of things can affect how much vitamin D our bodies actually produce from the sun. Like if you wear sunscreen, the time of day, where you live.
Yeah, so supplementing might be necessary, especially if you're concerned about being deficient.
Exactly. So Dr. Berg recommends about 10,000 IUs a day for maintenance.
Hmm.
But again, always talk to your doctor before starting any new supplement routine.
Good advice. Okay, what about those female-specific issues we talked about? Vitamin K1 for heavy bleeding, and then magnesium for cramps. What food should we be focusing on for those?
Yeah, for vitamin K1, you want to load up on those dark leafy greens. So kale, spinach, collards. Liver is also a good source of vitamin K1. And then for magnesium, leafy greens again. But also pumpkin seeds, almonds, and black beans.
Leafy greens are the best. It seems like they're good for almost everything.
They are. They're a must-have for a healthy diet for sure. They're just packed with vitamins, minerals, antioxidants. You really can't go wrong.
Now, for fibroids, remember Dr. Berg suggested a combo of vitamin D, magnesium, zinc, and vitamin K2. Do you have any specific food recommendations for zinc and vitamin K2?
Yeah, so for zinc, shellfish are really your best bet, especially oysters. But red meat, pumpkin seeds, and chickpeas are good sources too. And then for vitamin K2, you want to think about those fermented foods. So like sauerkraut, natto, and cheese.
Oh, interesting. I've been meaning to try natto. I've heard good things about it, health-wise.
Yeah, it's definitely an acquired taste. A little bit like liver, I guess.
Oh, okay. I'll keep that in mind. And just to remind everyone, Dr. Berg did suggest a pretty high dose of vitamin D for fibroids, so it's really important to talk to your doctor before experimenting with those kind of levels.
Yes, definitely. Always best to get personalized advice from a healthcare professional.
Okay, so what about high lipids? Which basically means high cholesterol. Dr. Berg recommended niacin for that. What are some good sources of niacin? And did he have any other recommendations for managing cholesterol?
Yeah, so good sources of niacin, which is also known as vitamin B3, are liver, chicken, tuna, and peanuts. And yeah, Dr. Berg, he really emphasized reducing sugar and refined carbs in your diet. He said those can really wreak havoc on your cholesterol levels.
That makes sense. Those refined carbs, yeah, they're not doing us any favors.
It's all about swapping those out for whole, unprocessed foods whenever possible.
Okay, I like that. So let's go back to some of those other deficiencies we talked about in that rapid fire round. Remember, eye twitching. Dr. Berg linked that to magnesium deficiency. What are some good sources of magnesium?
Avocados are a great source. Dark chocolate and bananas, too.
Oh, okay. Good to know. What about heart palpitations, which he linked to potassium deficiency?
Sweet potatoes, beets, and watermelon are all good sources of potassium.
I will.
Oh, and of course, the leafy greens that we already talked about.
So that watermelon craving in the summer, maybe that's your body just telling you it needs more potassium.
Maybe. It's fascinating how our bodies try to, guide us towards what we need.
Yeah, it really is. Okay, so the chronic cough, the one that Dr. Berg linked to low calcium, what are good sources for that?
Well, dairy products are, the classic source of calcium. But if you're dairy-free, you can also get it from leafy greens, almonds, and fortified plant milks.
Oh, so there are options even if you don't do dairy.
Right, always options.
Good. What about those ice cravings that could be a sign of an iron deficiency?
Yeah, so red meat is a top source of iron. But Dr. Berg did caution against overdoing it. Spinach, lentils, beans, those are all good sources too.
Yeah, I've heard that too much iron can be a bad thing, right?
Yeah, you don't want to overload because our bodies can't easily get rid of excess iron.
Okay, that makes sense. So zinc, that was the one that Dr. Berg said is important for libido and immune function. We talked about shellfish and red meat. Are there any other good sources?
Yeah, hemp seeds, pumpkin seeds, cashews, those are good plant-based sources.
Got it. What about iodine? which he linked to fibrocystic breast tissue.
Dairy products and eggs contain iodine, and if you use iodized salt, that's another way to get it in your diet.
Okay, so many different ways to get the nutrients we need. Amazing. What about dry, flaky skin? Dr. Berg recommended omega-3 fatty acids for that one.
Right, so fatty fish like salmon, mackerel, and sardines, those are excellent sources. He also suggested cod liver oil or fish oil supplements. But, remember, he did have that concern about excessive seed oil consumption. He thinks that could be contributing to skin issues. So it's worth, doing your own research and making informed choices about the types of oils that you're using.
That's a good point. So much to consider. Okay, what about muscle weakness, the vitamin E deficiency?
Almonds, sunflower seeds, and spinach are all good sources of vitamin E. And remember that tocotrienol form that he mentioned? You can find that in palm oil and rice bran oil. But as always, moderation is key with any type of oil.
Okay, just a couple more to go. For fatty liver, Dr. Berg recommended choline. Are there good sources besides liver and egg yolks?
Yeah, there are. Brussels sprouts, broccoli, and wheat germ are all good sources of choline.
Okay, cool. And finally, cold source. We talked about lysine for that. Any recommendations besides the Parmesan cheese, turkey, chicken, fish?
Beans and lentils, those are good plant-based sources of lysine.
Wow, well, we covered a lot of ground there. It's amazing how many different foods can provide the nutrients we need to thrive.
It really is. And I think it's just a good reminder that eating a variety of foods is really key. It helps us get that wide spectrum of nutrients that our bodies need to function properly.
That makes sense. But even with the best intentions, it can be tough to, always eat a perfectly balanced diet all the time.
Absolutely. Life happens. We get busy. We have cravings. We're on the go. So I think it's really important to just have a realistic approach to nutrition.
Okay, so what does a realistic approach actually look like?
It's about just doing your best to make those healthy choices, most of the time, without stressing over perfection.
Okay, that makes sense. But how do we know if we're truly deficient in something? Should we be, running to the doctor every time we have one of these symptoms?
That's a great question. It's important to remember that these occasional symptoms, they're often harmless and can be caused by a variety of factors, not just nutrient deficiencies.
So how do we know when it's something more serious, something we should be concerned about?
Pay attention to those persistent or recurring symptoms. So if you're experiencing something that's unusual or concerning, it's always best to, check in with a healthcare professional.
Right. And they can help determine what the underlying cause is and then recommend the right testing or treatment if necessary.
Exactly. And they can also give you, personalized advice based on your own needs and health history.
So I guess the takeaway here is to be aware of these potential connections between symptoms and deficiencies, but not to jump to conclusions or self-diagnose.
Exactly. It's about using this knowledge as a starting point for a conversation with your healthcare provider.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Now, did Dr. Berg talk about any other factors that could contribute to nutrient deficiencies, besides just not eating the right foods?
He did. He mentioned that a lot of people today rely heavily on ultra-processed foods, and those often lack essential nutrients, and they're loaded with all those unhealthy ingredients that, we don't want. He also pointed out that our food choices are often driven by pleasure and taste rather than health, which can lead to that imbalance in our nutrient intake.
Oh, that's so true. I know I'm guilty of that sometimes. It's easy to get caught up in the convenience and, the deliciousness of those processed foods. It's hard to resist sometimes.
It's definitely a challenge to navigate the modern food landscape and make choices that truly support our well-being, right? We're constantly bombarded with tempting treats and convenience foods. So it really takes effort to, prioritize those nutrient-rich options.
But it's an effort worth making, right? Our health is our most valuable asset.
Absolutely. It's an investment that pays off in so many ways.
He also mentioned something about hydroponic farming. What was that about? I don't think we talked about that.
Yeah, he pointed out that a lot of our food supply is now grown hydroponically. So that means it's grown in water instead of soil. And while there are some benefits to hydroponic farming, he did express concern that the nutrient content of hydroponically grown produce might be lower than soil-grown produce.
Really? Why is that?
Well, our bodies need a variety of minerals, right? And soil is really a natural source of those minerals. Hydroponic farming, they often just provide a limited number of those minerals in the water solution that they use to grow the plants.
That's fascinating. I never really thought about that. So even if we're eating plenty of fruits and vegetables, we might not be getting all those minerals that we need.
It's a complex issue for sure, and there's ongoing debate about those nutritional differences.
So what's the takeaway for us, as consumers? What should we be doing?
I think the key is to just be informed and make conscious choices whenever possible.
Okay, so what does that mean in practical terms?
Think about where your food comes from, how it's grown, and what factors might be influencing its nutrient content.
So it's not just about what's on our plate, but also the whole story behind our food, right?
Exactly. It's about making choices that support both our well-being and the health of the planet.
Well, this deep dive has really opened my eyes to the complexities of nutrition and just how interconnected everything is.
It's a lifelong journey for sure, learning and discovering, and we've really only just touched the surface here.
Well said. Well, are you ready for more insights from Dr. Berg? Because we still have one more part to go.
Oh, I'm ready. Bring it on.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the often overlooked world of nutrient deficiencies. We've uncovered so many fascinating connections between, seemingly random symptoms and what we might be missing in our diets. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's like our bodies are constantly trying to communicate their needs, often through these subtle, little whispers that we don't always recognize.
Yeah, like they're sending us little clues, hoping we'll crack the code. But
Yeah.
with so much information out there, it can be hard to know where to start when it comes to actually addressing these potential deficiencies. Where do we even begin?
Right. And that's where Dr. Berg's advice on meal planning comes in. He really emphasizes being proactive and choosing those nutrient-dense foods to prevent those deficiencies from happening in the first place.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's always easier to stay on track when you have a plan, right? But creating a truly balanced meal plan can feel kind of overwhelming with so many different options and dietary philosophies out there.
He actually recommends a specific video on his channel for meal planning ideas. We won't go into the details here, but it might be worth checking out if you're looking for some inspiration and practical tips.
Okay, good to know. I'll link to that in the show notes for everyone. But, I think what's really resonated with me throughout this whole deep dive is how interconnected everything is. It's not just about addressing isolated symptoms, but understanding how each nutrient can impact our overall well-being, the big picture.
Exactly. It's like a delicate ecosystem where everything's intertwined. So when one piece is missing or out of balance, it can have those ripple effects throughout the whole system. It's amazing.
Yeah, so true. It really makes you realize that even those minor aches and pains or, those days when you're feeling a little sluggish, those energy slumps, those could be our body's way of saying like, hey, pay attention, something's not quite right here.
Absolutely. So instead of reaching for that quick fix or just ignoring those signals, it's worth exploring the potential connections to our diet and lifestyle.
Yeah.
Could that fatigue be linked to an iron deficiency? Could those frequent headaches be a sign of low magnesium? It's empowering to consider those possibilities and take proactive steps.
It's like becoming a detective for your own health. You start noticing the patterns, connecting the dots, and making those small adjustments that can really add up to make a big difference.
Exactly. It's all about tuning in to your body's wisdom and becoming an active participant in your well-being.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from all of this?
Don't underestimate the power of food. It's not just about calories or macros. It's about nourishment, vitality, and really supporting your body's incredible ability to heal and thrive.
Well said. And remember, this deep dive is just a starting point. We've explored a lot of information, but it's really important to do your own research. Talk to your doctor, maybe a registered dietitian, and really personalize this knowledge to your own unique needs and health goals. Don't just take our word for it.
Exactly. This is all about empowering you to make those informed decisions about your health, not following some rigid set of rules or, trying to self-diagnose.
So as we say goodbye for now, keep those lines of communication open with your body, stay curious, and keep exploring this amazing world of health and wellness. There's so much out there to discover.
Until next time, happy nourishing.